Good evening, I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. Mary Kissel, my colleague and co-host and friend, joins in studio. Mary is of the Wall Street Journal editorial board and, most importantly, the host of Opinion Journal each day at 1 p.m., WSJ Live. Mary, a very good evening to you. The presidential contest already giving us opera. Mrs. Clinton's non-singing performance at Iowa is the latest example of a powerful presence, a presence that does not believe, the campaign does not believe it needs to engage or in any way coax or pet or please the media. There's even the story that Mrs. Clinton plans to go all the way to the nomination process in the summer of 2016 without sitting with major media, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, CBS, ABC. It's fantastic. However, it is where we are in 2015 that the major presidential candidate for the Democrats does not need the attention of the media. So, of course, we go to the media to help us out on this. What it means. Sean Trende of Real Clear Politics, the chief analyst. He's the pollster analyst for Real Clear Politics, which is a blend of polls you'll see everywhere. That's why it's so reliable. It averages the polls. However, Mr. Trende and his colleague have worked up an index that immediately compelled me because it's historical. It dates back to 1856, which, for those of you who don't have Wiki in front of you, is the first instance in which the Republicans, the famous third party, contested for the presidential contest. Mr. Fremont was the nominee. Mr. Lincoln was mentioned in the course of the conversation in Philadelphia. However, when you take from 56 until 14, the most recent election, and you lay it out according to Mr. Trende's index, you get some unusual numbers that show the strength and weakness, and sometimes you'd have to say the blow-off of both parties. Good evening to you, Sean. First, the way you constructed this, the presidential, the congressional, the gubernatorial, the legislative, what were you looking to achieve with all these numbers? Good evening to you, Sean.
Oh, good evening to you as well. We hear a lot about what's going on with the presidency, and I've written a lot about the presidency. I don't think the situation is as dire for the GOP as many make it out to be, but I think you have to take a broader view if you're really talking about the state of the parties, because you need Congress to pass laws, and a lot of the modern fights we have are in state legislatures over things like voter ID laws, food stamp benefits, redistricting, the list goes on and on. So what we decided to do is, rather than just look at who had won the last presidential election, to take a look at the various branches and levels of government, put them together into a single metric, and see how the parties stacked up against each other.
Now, there are ups and downs, a lot of volatility in the data, but are there clear cycles, Sean, that it's the Republicans' time after 8 years of Democrats and vice versa?
I don't think that's quite right. I think you do tend to see when someone wins the presidency, the parties do worse elsewhere. And there has been, since the end of World War II, this tendency for a party to win 2 terms in the White House and then the other side gets a chance. If you're looking at a long-term trend, though, really since the 1970s, the Republicans have been on the upswing in terms of the power nationwide, and right now they're the strongest they've been since the 1920s.
1920s. We go immediately to that because that was, if you'll all recall, Mr. Harding, who died in office, replaced by Mr. Coolidge, the vice president, who was then elected on his own, chose not to run for re-election, and, most importantly, the Hoover administration was elected in 1928 at the peak of the Republican Party, and that's what worries me here only momentarily. Are we seeing a peak before a fall? Certainly 1930 looks like the Republicans plunged into a volcano not to emerge for many decades. So can you tell from this poll, does the high point mean you're about to fall off a cliff?
No, it's not predictive, and in fact, there's various statistical tests you can do to see if there's any type of prediction you can make, and there really isn't much in the way of that. So yeah, it could happen. The GOP could win the presidency in 2016, and we go into a major recession, and they're back to the 1970s. But the point is that we've been hearing for the past over a decade now that the GOP is on its last legs, that you're getting the last gasp. But at this point, I think all these last gasps look more like breathing.
Sean, how do you weight the state versus local versus federal aspects of this index?
Well, the original index weights them evenly. It weights state legislature, governor, House, Senate, and presidency evenly. Some people objected to that, so we tried it with just the presidency versus kind of everyone else lumped together, and it really didn't change the outcome. The GOP is still at a historic high.
The parties look evenly matched. As I look at your poll, go up and down. If you win, the other guy loses. What we have right now, let's be fresh. Let's sit right on top of it. What we have right now is the results of the Republicans doing extremely well in the midterms, 2010 and 2014. They did okay in 2012, but the president was reelected. Is that those three elections right now, are they indicative of where we're headed? In other words, I'm trying to narrow down here. Midterms with low turnout, which is what we have in midterms, favor a party that is not especially, how am I going to put this? It's not a big city party. That's what it favors. Okay, that's my polite way of saying the Republicans are not big city. And that rules out that demographic story that we can also tell. So now we're coming into a presidential year that doesn't favor the Republican Party. It favors the big cities. Is that important, Sean, from your poll, from your index?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, the previous peak for the GOP was actually 2004. Before the 2014 election. So we have these two presidential elections, 2008 and 2012, and no one really knows quite what to do with them. I mean, people think they do. The Democrats say, yes, this is the new rising electorate.
Right,
the Republicans say, well, this is Barack Obama. We just aren't going to know until 2016 or 2020, because right now it's just two observations, and that's not really data.
The demographics. This is the Latino vote and the female vote. Is that the other one that's significant?
Those two.
And the youth, the millennials. If we were to not use your index, and if we were to use the story of the demographics, is it all Democrats still, even with Congress and all those state legislatures so dominated by Republicans, the millennials and the youth and the women still dominate?
There's actually a lot of overlap there. The millennials tend to be more racially diverse. A lot of the gender gap is attributable to the fact that turnout is much higher among African American females than African American males, and they also vote they vote more heavily Democratic. But no, I think these things are difficult to game out. There's no doubt that over time Republicans can't continue to lose the people who were born after 1990, 55, 45. At some point, it becomes impossible to win elections. But, let's also recall that the baby boomers, the people who vote 60-40 Republican now, went for McGovern in 1972 and Jimmy Carter in 76. So these things do change over time.
But, Sean, people change over time, too. The 20-year-olds that may have voted for Obama 10 years later or 20 years later may decide that, in the midterms of the next presidential election, that they don't want to vote Democratic anymore.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, Carl Everett Ladd, who was one of the geniuses of his day for election predictions, said after 1976, there is nothing good in these results for the Republicans. I cannot see anything positive for them. And of course, in 1980, they had a pretty good year. So I think that's the important thing, is that the only constant is change, and I think it's foolish to try to predict what our politics are going to look like in 10 years. One
more possible indicator, which is the state legislatures. I think the Republicans now, after the success in 14, have 69, 70. They have an incredible number of the 99 in the country, some dominant number. Can we regard legislatures as the farm team for the future, or do they all resemble Albany, which seems a universe of itself? Everybody lives in Florida. They're always being indicted. The governor runs away from them. And I understand it's Tammany Hall and it's historical, but does that represent all the other legislatures? They're not interested in the national picture, and we should not use them as a way of saying that the trend is for the Republicans?
I've been studying elections for a reasonably long time, and I still can't figure out the New York legislature. I mean, I guess on the plus side, the legislature isn't polarized, but on the negative side, you could probably use a little more.
Well, it's not really a legislature. It's just three guys in a room, right, John?
So Albany is not the same as what happens in Florida or what happens in Alabama. Those state legislatures are more indicative, more farm team, more future national politicians, Sean?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, here in Columbus, we have two parties that duke it out. A lot of our candidates come out of the legislature, and that's really more the rule.
Right now, you can go to Real Clear Politics and see Sean and his colleague David Byler's work. It points to the Republicans looking very comfortable, very strong right now, not since 1928. Of course, that's a bit of a curse. Not since, anytime you say not since 1928,
Never could, John.
You're talking about a murder is about to happen in another room. Sean Trende of Real Clear Politics, Mary Kissel, the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal. I'm John Batchelor.